Hi, everybody. Welcome to night 4 of the Orphan's Tales live reading. I'm very glad to see you all tonight. It's dark. I've been parenting all day, and he is so 2 years old, and everything is just no. So I'm very pleased to be here with you, where at least if somebody says no, it's gonna be me. So welcome to the Orphan's Tales, to The Girl in the Garden, to your trash Scheherazade, Catherine Valenti. Here what we hear playing is S.J. Tucker's wonderful song, Snake Star Song, from the first Orphan's Tales album for The Girl in the Garden. You can find her at sjtucker.com and on Bandcamp as well under the same name. She's amazing. I've been talking her up a lot. You won't be disappointed. So yeah, it's good to see everybody. See, you can see me. I can't see you. It's the weird waitress thing. Yeah, so like I said, I'm trying to think of things to talk about the Orphan's Tales and dredge up those 20 years ago memories of having written it. Let's get all the legal stuff out of the way first. So for legal reasons, you are not listening to an audiobook. This is not an audiobook. This is a play. This is a one-woman show. Should anyone at Random House ever ask you if you've heard an Orphan's Tales audiobook, you have not. Thank you so much to the people who tipped me last night. It really means the world to us right now, as things are pretty tight. So Claire, who I forgot the night before, Mandy, Suzanne, Catherine, Laura, Caitlin, and Deb. You are my heroes. Thank you so much. There is a tip jar in my user profile and on my website, catherinemvalenti.com. You can also subscribe to my Patreon at CatValenti and follow me on Twitter at CatValenti, if you didn't get here from Twitter to begin with, which you probably did. So we're back to In the Night Garden. Honestly, like, as especially these beginning parts, God, they're just so old as far as my writing goes. I started writing this book literally the day after I finished writing The Labyrinth, which was my first novel, and is hard to follow. I'm happy to admit that now. I wasn't so much before, but I will admit it's a 200-page poem. Whatever. I didn't know how to write novels, so I wrote a poem. I took the margins out. So in a very real way, this is my first novel. It's attempting to tell a plotty story. There's more plot than you can pack in here. But I wrote it originally, and in fact, it's dedicated to... I should probably tell her that I'm streaming it, because she might like to see it, for Sarah, who, when she was very young, wanted a garden. And that was my niece, in my ex-husband's niece, so my niece by permanently dissolved marriage. She was very, very small, and it was originally... The idea was to write a children's book. Not that song isn't great, just moving into the vocal portion. I was going to write a children's book for Sarah and like laminate it so she could get jam all over it, and give it to her for Christmas. And as Tolkien said, the tale grew in the telling, and it got grossly long. So Sarah was much older by the time she got this book, and is much older now. She is in college. So actually Sarah is almost the age now that I was when I wrote this book, which is terrifying. But a lot of what I think about is my room, my room in my house in Japan. It was right across from the train tracks, so it was the second story, but the train tracks were elevated, so you would just see them go by, and you would see these flashes of people in the train cars, and the light and their faces silhouetted and through the plum trees, and it was a very lonely place for me, but it's what I think of, that little room with the tatami, every time I think about the early days of writing this book. So Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in and forcing me to brush my hair every day and put on a full goddamn face of makeup at 8:30 at night. Like, I guess I didn't think that all the way through when I decided to do this. That, like, not only am I wearing a full face of makeup, I'm out of foundation. I ran out in Australia, so I'm like using various things to spackle on my face in a facsimile of makeup. So it's certainly interesting to put on a show here every night. So thanks for tuning in for it. All right, let's get started, shall we? Yes, we are in the middle of Grandmother's Tale. No doubt we're gonna end up going deeper into the tales tonight, a couple levels down. The whole structure of this is Arabian Nights. Like, it's supposed to be like this. I did it on purpose. I've been asked in many interviews why I wrote it like that. I think that's a very strange question for an interview. But they are all nested. They will all come back together, I promise. But yeah, there's layers deep that we're gonna end up getting here. I never mapped it out. But people have, and I think 9 layers is the deepest it gets at one point, but will be a while before we get to 9 layers deep. Grandmother's Tale continued. It was dark, of course. These sorts of things always begin in the dark. I leaned with my back against the rock wall, feeling the slight damp, the thick air of that stone womb which was blacker than black. Ages passed, or minutes. I looked into the shadows, their substance, their limbs, their weight. At times I felt at peace and watchful, as though I sat on the giant lip of a blue-black lily, its fat flesh curling underneath me, so perfect that no part of me could not be a part of it. And my body was changed, converted into its charcoal and gloam. At other times I felt cold and alone and very small, but I felt the tiny struggling light inside me, and it was warm as a fire at my feet. It spread through me as though I was a sieve of silk, left me clean and pure in that silent cavern. I sat with palms upturned, trying to hold the curve of darkness like a great hanging belly, thunder black and written upon with swarthy symbols, all alive and breathing and swirling in the violet long past sunset. I think I must have nearly fallen asleep, when suddenly my flesh sparked and shivered, and a thing began to coalesce out of the hematite air. I could not, at first, see anything at all but a length of deeper black amid the blackness. Its edges seemed to shimmer with light, a heat lightning crisping the edges of a shape glowing like an afterimage. I was afraid, granddaughter, of course I was afraid. I cowered into the curve of the cavern, shaking like a newborn fawn. At length I perceived a long head and flowing hair, luminous eyes round as moons. It seemed a part of the stone, a part of the night, a part of nothing I had ever come near to knowing. My eyes rolled in my head and sweat slicked my skin. My heart beat so fast I felt as though I had swallowed a hummingbird. Finally, the outlines of the shape rimmed in white fire became clear and distinct. In a moment it was utterly familiar to me, the long curve of black neck, the smooth haunches and velvet fur, a thick tail in 100 braids brushing the cave floor, breath puffing from her great nostrils like pipe smoke. A horse beyond fantasies of horses, beyond any guess at size or hope of beauty, her ears seeming to brush the ceiling like stiff feathers, their twitchings carving some arcane verse on the rock. Scattered around her hooves lay charred jawbones and shoulder blades and sternums like scepters. The mare watched me calmly, snorting occasionally and blinking her incandescent eyes. There was no sound for a space that seemed like 1,000 winters joined to the snow line. I still could not say where the courage came from what hidden place in me it sprung up and gurgled brightly, but I stood on clambering legs and reached out my little hand to the creature, avoiding the rattling bones in their protective ring, I stroked her nose and the sides of her lightless face, and granddaughter, I cannot even now describe the softness of her flesh, the gentle glide of my hand over her thick, gleaming fur. Her skin was the texture of new cream, the shade of a crow flying high in a moonless night. She was beautiful and terrifying, savage and pure. Her eyes wheeled like suns, and her great heart thundered against me. And here is easily the coolest illustration we have had yet. So I'm going to hold it for a minute so you can get a good look at it. That's Michael Kaluta, who did the illustrations, who is a legend for a reason. I buried my face in her mane and breathed the scent of wild earth and a burning sky. There was no other world but her. And suddenly, without warning, that great head turned like an opening door, and the black mare bit into the flesh of my shoulder with blazing teeth, tearing muscle from bone. I screamed uselessly into the echoes, and blood surged from the wound like a river through a red canyon, gushing warmly onto my breasts and hands. I flailed against her, beating her flank with my fists, but the teeth only ground harder into me. I think I must have fainted then, and as I fell against her body, I expected nothing but death. When I came around, I lay once more against the rock wall, drenched in my own blood as though I had been caught in a rainstorm. The mare had disappeared. I wept bitterly. Though she had sunk her teeth in me, I missed them. I felt empty without their light burning into me. She had done no more than she had always done, chewed a hole in flesh, and the edges of her hole longed for her after she was gone. Her absence filled the chamber like a voice. In her place was a much smaller creature, not at all the commanding or terrible, sitting on its haunches, eyes sparkling in the returned blackness. When it saw I had revived, it padded across the earthen floor and stood directly in front of my face, a handsome red fox with a splendid furry tail. He smelt of burnt grass and copper filings, and his fur crackled with a baleful kind of rusted light. To my surprise, he bent his inquisitive head and began licking the blood from my wound. He closed his polished eyes as he worked, long, rough passes with his pink tongue, prickling and horribly painful. I bit my lip and did not whimper, though the brush of his fur against my tortured skin was agony. Slowly the scarlet ebbed from the pale. But he was not finished with me. The little fox opened his mouth and spoke quite clearly. Press some of the golden seal and dandelion root from your pack into the wound. Then use bay leaves to bind the poultice. It will help, but it is important that you do not stop the blood flow entirely. My mother has prepared you, but you will need the blood of your body. I obeyed numbly. When I had finished, the fox bent to sniff at my shoulder and check my work. I watched him carefully, and as he inclined his head, I lashed out and gripped his bristling throat in my fist. Through his struggles against my strong hands and his snapping snout trying to reach me, I hissed at him through my own sharp teeth. Now tell me what is going on here, fox, or I shall have you skinned and in my pack with the bay and the dandelion faster than a lion can swallow a mouse. The fox snorted and sputtered like a petulant child. After some sniffling and snorting, after realizing that I would not let his neck out of my hands, he replied with injured dignity. You, little girl, are not supposed to touch me. You are not supposed to assault me or ask me questions. It is not done. But you touched the mare, and that too is forbidden. I can only hope the pain of her bite was extreme, that she endured your hands on her. Filthy. They are so dirty. You are so dirty and dark, and you touched her. You touched me. I let him go carefully, moving backwards from his furious form as he rubbed his nose and his throat and washed his fur with desperate strokes of that pink tongue. I smiled with what I assumed was bravery and nodded with what I imagined to be a casual air. Fox, I think I have been good, and suffered quite enough to know what is happening to me in this place." The fox hooted in derision, a strange noise coming from his delicate russet snout. "Oh, you think you've been good, do you? You think you've suffered. You know nothing at all, stupid as a goat." He drew himself up on his haunches. "I am the servant of the black mare. That was my mother you fondled, wicked child. She who invented words and yet does not speak. She who brings dreams and visions yet does not sleep. She who swallows the storm yet knows nothing of rain or wind. I speak for her. I am her own. This was not your test, human child. That lies beyond. Pain is no test. In my mind, you have already failed. You dared touch her who carries the moon in her belly, who fold the stars in the beginning of the world. But she allowed your unclean hands on her and still blessed you with her sacred teeth, so there must be something in you which was born in her." The fox pawed the earth fretfully, imploring me with his eyes. "Why did you do it? Why did you have to stroke her as though she were your mount, your little pet? Oh, mother mine, would you have ridden her? Even I have never been permitted to touch her in all my years of service, never once. Terrible child! Why could you not have kept your hands to yourself?" The fox trotted toward me again. In a crimson flash, he cruelly raked his claws across my left breast, splitting the flesh like a ripe plum. I could have sworn there were tears in his little black eyes, catching in his golden fur and whiskers. "There," he snarled. "That is for your trespass. That is my mark. I am the servant. I walk alongside the mare. I have drunk her milk and hunted with her. I chewed the tiny grass stars in their hundreds and thousands by her side, and I will not heal that one for you." I breathed hard, genuinely afraid now of the little animal, his hackles high, both of us panting in the dark. I clasped a hand over my new wound, blood dripping through the sieve of my fingers. The fox seemed to compose himself, his fur returning to its usual sleekness. "I have wasted half your time already, idiot girl." His eyes glazed over, retreating into the ritual. "But you will not pass your test, so it hardly matters. Go further in, filth child, into the second chamber, which is the wolf cave, and from there to the cave of the 7 sleepers. There lies your test. Pass these chambers and emerge a woman, or die within them. Remember, pain is not a test. Knowledge is not enough. Many have gone before you, little one, and none have ever spoken of their trials. It is forbidden. You may take nothing but your own body. Your pack must stay here. Go with the blessing of the mare and acquit yourself as well as a brat like you can." With that, the fox snapped his needle jaws once in my direction and walked toward the far end of the cavern, right through the stone wall, disappearing as though he never was. I was still bleeding, and though a few of the leaves and powders from my pack helped, there was a dark stain on my dress. I smoothed my hair and stood firmer now, looking for the entrance into the second chamber. And of course, where the fox had vanished with a flourish of his beautiful tail, there was now a small hole, low in the rock, the color of fresh blood, hardly big enough for me to squeeze through. I walked toward it, trying to tell myself that I was at ease, serene as the moon on a crane's feathers. The girl closed her large eyes as she spoke, so that her eyelids and their mosaic covering seemed to float like black lilies in the paleness of her face. Frogs sent emerald notes up into the air, and owls sang in low, gleaming strands, resting in the black branches, veiled in the violet breath of jacaranda flowers. Under their harmonics, her voice sighed back and forth. The girl drank from the wine flask, running her fingers over its engraved surface. The wind rustled her hair like petals on a lake. Even though they had rested, as she spoke, the boy had again drifted into a shallow sleep, and the story's words wove in and out of his mind like a needle drawing silken thread. His head lay on the girl's lap, and she stroked his soft black hair as she continued, at first timidly, then with a growing tenderness. The stars overhead burned like court candles. The moon was high, full as a blown sail, riding softly through the rolling blue clouds, cutting through their foamy saffron flesh with a glowing prow. Shadows fell in long minarets on the gardens, the courtyards, the lemon trees and olive, the acacias and climbing vines, the bone-white lilies, and the sleeping palace. The girl's voice was like the river rushes rubbing together in a warm wind, winding through the cobbled paths. Grandmother's tale continued. I crouched and wriggled into the hole, into the slick rock, which became mud as quickly as ice becomes water. On my belly, I dug into the earth like a worm. I could barely breathe for the dripping dirt. I could barely move for the press of the slippery cave. I told myself I was not afraid of the dirt. Dirt is dirt, and holes always empty out somewhere. I told myself that while dirt, which was only dirt, slithered into my mouth and my nose and my eyes, and all I could taste was earth, and I could see nothing at all. But I emerged. You always emerge, eventually, on the other side, into another cavern with another earthen floor. It was too dark to see the other side, the rock walls narrowing upward into a skinny crack through which I could see the cascading moonlight and hear the fall of a soft rain somewhere in the distance. I should have known. I should have known from the moment my foot touched the cave floor. I could hear a storm terribly far off, the drip of water off thick pine needles and the drinking grasses, the sucking mushrooms, the soggy moss. It rang in my ears like bells on a horse's saddle, the silver, slight glistening of rain on fat green leaves and the slippery smell of damp, rotting flowers. But the haunch of sky I saw through the opening in the cave roof showed a clear night, full of hard, bright stars. The rain fell in some place so far off it did not even disturb the air above me, but my ears and my nose struck on it like a blade sparking under a hammer. I trotted quickly around the dim room, examining and investigating, trying to sniff out the test before it leapt out at me. I should have known. It felt so natural to press a wet nose into the corners of the rock, to canter and bristle and snap my jaws together in the dark. I looked for a second door, but there was nothing, though one side of the rock face was curiously polished, a deep amber color that reflected the room and the moonlight, and me. I saw a flash of gray and white as I passed it, and stopped suddenly, my heart spinning around in my throat. I saw my image in the stone. Staring dumbfounded at me from the shining cave wall was a very large and very handsome gray wolf. Great shaggy ears twitched, and my tongue lolled between frighteningly fierce teeth. My eyes sparkled black, and my fur was the shade of shadows cast on water by the moon, starry white and silver, every shimmer of silver, from stone to snow, glossy and pale over powerful legs, down to the tip of my extremely long and proud tail, which I thumped grandly on the earthen floor. All in all, my granddaughter, I looked very fine. I howled just to hear it, bouncing off the walls like an arrow of green wood. It was so loud I jumped at my own voice. Yet I was still alone in the room. I trotted back and forth as though I had never had to manage with only 2 legs. Nothing was more natural than my new loping gait. The balance of my tail, the catch of my claws on hidden roots and rocks. I padded around on my new paws, the quick thud of them quickly replacing the ridiculous idea that I had ever been a girl and slept on a soft bed. My thoughts became wolfish, itching to be released into the night to hunt and run with these strong limbs over the fields. My heart was flooded with the memory of bounding through feathery snow with my pack, nursing my beautiful gray pups in a warm den, tracking hares and deer over green mountains, prowling through farms filled with fat pigs and helpless spring lambs, wordless and fierce without the endless sweeping of huts and hearths. But then, what is a hut? What is a hearth? It became terribly difficult to even remember my name, and then to remember that I had one, and then to remember what a name was. It was like going to sleep, covering myself in a warm blanket which was a body. And I was so tired, so tired. You must understand, knife of my heart, how the thing that changed me takes the mind as well as the body, how it swallows up everything into itself. But as that night seemed to trickle by and nothing at all happened, I curled into a ball of gleaming fur in the center of the cave and fell asleep, lost in the blackness of endless night and dreams of hunting and eating, always eating. Looking back now, I think I hardly slept at all. Wolves don't need a night's full sack of sleep. I startled awake, though there was no sound to disturb me, and saw 3 tall figures standing a polite distance away. The first was a white wolf with sloping ears and gentle eyes the color of rain, her fur gleaming nearly blue like the new moon on snowy branches. Her tail waved slowly behind her, a stream of ice drawing patterns in the soil. The second was black as midwinter's night, his eyes of storm clouds cut with lightning, fur thick and dark as the depths of a mountain lake. The third was every shade of gold, as I was every shade of silver, from the white flame to deep bronze, flowing and braiding together like liquid fire. Her eyes were the same flickering color, leaping and sparkling. My mouth was horribly dry. I could not swallow. It took all of my newfound wolfness not to bolt from their terrible faces. I struggled and grasped for my reason, my girl self in the mounds and layers of wolf. They spoke then in unison, their muzzles shaping the words strangely but beautifully, a growling gentleness. "Welcome, little dog. Which of us will you have?" I tried to speak, but it was impossible. I stuttered and gasped and yelped, trying to form words out of my silky muzzle and dagger teeth, my silver brow furrowed with the effort. "Child," the white one said, her voice was the wind off the mountains, welcoming and sweet. "You must choose. If you cannot manage to speak, you may simply come to one of us and touch our fur with your nose. We are wolves, after all. We do not overvalue speech." "She doesn't understand, sister," the black one interrupted, his words like saplings felled by bronze axes. He turned to me with brittle, proud eyes and spoke slowly, as if to a very stupid and stubborn horse. "A guide, little dog. You have to choose one of us as your guide. You must know how these things are done." The black beast snorted, clearly too bored to continue. I looked at them, tall and terrible, the white and the black, and the third, the soft, rippling gold one who had not spoken, but whose tail swayed lazily from side to side, her calm eyes like jeweled moons. I padded over to her and pressed my wet nose into her neck like a field of daffodils. Her fur smelled good and sweet, which was all I could think of, that she smelled right, and smelling, after all, is everything. I could swear she smiled at me. And when I pulled back from her warm-smelling body, the other 2 had gone. She looked at me with eyes like the spaces in a honeycomb, and glanced away past me, where her packmates had gone. "We got so lost, she whispered. I didn't understand. How could I begin to guess? But I pushed my snout up under hers reassuringly and shut my eyes, washed in her smell. She growled deep in her throat, though not a threat growl, a soft pup growl that rattled in my bones. We never meant to get so lost. And there's a very pretty wolf drawing with the moon there. And I think that's where we'll stop for tonight and pick up with the wolf's tale tomorrow night. Thank you all so much for tuning in, so to speak. I'm going to have a sip of something here, as my throat is pretty rough as well. If anyone has any questions they want to ask, I'm happy to answer them at this point. Yes, wolves. I was a 22-year-old goth girl. Of course there's wolves in it. Again, I remember, I don't know, maybe 25% of what's in this book. So every time I read, it's as much of a surprise to me as it is to any of you, I think. It's a lot of folklore to remember. And that was always the point of it, to tell a story through an entire culture's complete folkloric system. So we're sort of starting at the God point, and we'll get down to the little nitty gritties of folk magic as the story goes on. You said you didn't map this one out. How did you keep track of everything? So it's an awkward question because the answer makes me sound smarter than I am, and it's not about that. I didn't take any notes at all, ever. There is no whiteboard, there's no notebook you can find where this is all mapped out. It's just not. I have ADD. It's pretty intense, so it always seemed to me like less work to just write the book than to be organized with an outline. Almost all books feel that way to me, but The Orphan's Tales, certainly as I was pretty new at writing books, did. And like now that seems insane to me. It really does. Radiance, I did map out, at least in the editing portion of it. But it was just, I didn't know how to do anything. I was very young. I had nothing else in my life but writing this book. And being lonely and miserable. So it just, I don't know, it just happened that way. That was just how it came out. And, you know, I mean, I've seen people map out everything in these big forking wiki outlines, and I'm super impressed because I never did that and I never will do that. It just was way too much work to me to do anything like that. But it sounds arrogant to say I wrote this whole book and I didn't keep notes. I just didn't know how to organize myself. I was totally unmedicated for ADD then, so I just was living my writing life like I live the rest of my life, which is pretty much how I play like Street Fighter. You just mash all the buttons and hope the right combo comes through at some point or another. You just mash them, all of them, as quickly as you possibly can. Like that's my life philosophy. That's how I do. So that's how The Orphan's Tales got written. I wish that there was some other thing to say about it, because that does not make for a good lecture or teaching moment. But I just kept it all in my head because I didn't know any better at the time. Yeah. 22-year-old life. I mean, I got through my whole college degree without taking notes too, so not taking notes seems to work for me. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to take them. Yeah, so nesting stories is a lot to keep in your brain, so more power to you. Brain's not that amazing. It's mostly crap. Did you plan your reading at all or just read away? No, as you can tell by my forgetting what grandmother's voice sounds like in the beginning, I'm just sort of winging this. I have not prepped for it at all. I have an 18-month-old child and a novel that I'm working on right now. So both of those take a huge amount of energy. So I don't have enough time during the day to do what my partner does, which is a professional audiobook reader, and go through a script and decide these things. So I'm just kind of throwing out voices, and I can't do accents at all either. So it's just whatever comes out of my mouth, and we hope it joins up to the correct voices a little down the way. Yeah, so it's all winging it. That's the Street Fighter method. That's what we're discussing tonight, clearly. Oh, background reading to the tales, not my reading. Ha ha ha. No, it was my life. My background reading to writing the tales was my life. I've been obsessed with folklore and mythology since I was a tiny, tiny child. I did virtually no, if not no, research for this book, because you have to do research when it's your total obsession all the time and your degree is in it. My degree's in classics, which is basically a degree in mythology plus some gnarly languages. So genuinely, it's all just it's all just in there. It's preloaded by all those years of reading beforehand. Are there any teaser words I'd bless us with regarding the next novel? Sure. It's a boy Persephone story based in Finnish folk magic crossed with Where the Wild Things Are. So yeah, if you are on my Patreon, the first part of it, first 3 chapters is up, and I'll be posting the 4th chapter probably this weekend. So you can get little previews of it there. Yeah, so I hope that you guys like it when it comes out. And thank you very much for tuning in. Again, you can subscribe to my Patreon at Cat Valenti on Patreon. You can follow me on Twitter at Cat Valenti on Twitter if you didn't find your way here from Twitter to begin with. There is a tip jar in my Instagram profile and one on my website at catherinemvalenti.com. Really appreciate anything that you want to drop in there, and we'll give you a thanks and a shout out in the next during the next reading. This is all free though, so if times are as tight for you as they are for me, don't even worry about it. It's not about that. I really love spending these evenings with you. I feel like I should put Trash Scheherazade on my business cards from here on out. It really gives me something to look forward to every day, so I hope it gives you something to look forward to. Today is the day. At 2 p.m. today was when our state's shelter-in-place order came down. So no one's allowed out. We actually didn't have one up until now. Our city started one 5 days ago, but now it's the whole state, and it's much stricter. And you can go to prison for being out for anything other than groceries, essentially. So it's a dark time around here, and I know it's a dark time for a lot of you, and a very frightening time, first of the month and all. It's the worst April Fool's Day ever. And I think we all wish we were doing something else right now. But I'm glad to be doing this for you. And in addition to our shelter in place, which is going to be a phrase that is going to mean so many different things to us over the next decades. Like, we're going to be talking about that phrase. That phrase is going to echo in our memories. But in addition to all of that, the first flowers came up today in our garden. So there's purple crocuses out there. Persephone's flower. Persephone was picking a crocus when she was taken down to her uncle's weird shack. But yeah, so the crocuses are up. So it's a frightening time, but there's still flowers. Thank you for being my crocus. I hope that I can be yours. I'll see you tomorrow night in the garden. Same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel. Good night, guys.